I want to note that the announcement today by Mr. Holman, we are cautiously optimistic, as we've said, and that this surge of untrained, aggressive federal agents are going to leave Minnesota. And I guess they'll go wherever they're going to go. But the fact of the matter is, they left us with deep damage, generational trauma. They left us with economic ruin in some cases. They left us with many unanswered questions. Where are our children? Where and what is the process of the investigations into those that were responsible for the deaths of Renee and Alex? So while the federal government may move on to whatever next thing they want to do, the state of Minnesota and our administration is unwaveringly focused on the recovery of what they did. And there will be many steps in this process, many answers that we still need to get and will pursue. But as we started earlier this week, one of the first things we can do and what we're focusing on today is what can we start doing on the economic recovery, the damage that has been done to our economy, specifically to small business owners, and even more specifically to immigrant small business owners, which for every other administration and for most of our history is the epitome of the American dream. Come to this country with nothing and build something to be proud of, build something that creates jobs, build something that creates this incredible diversity and a food scene across this state that is second to none, to entrepreneurship, to the work that they've done. Meeting a few weeks ago down at the Hmong Market, and a gentleman who came here and got a food stall, and 3 of his children are now medical doctors that went through American universities to become medical doctors to help make this state the best for health care. Those are stories we should be celebrating, not dangerous police chases through peaceful neighborhoods, not little boys in little backpacks being hauled away, and not mourning of parents and family for American and Minnesota citizens being killed on the streets.
It's not looking too good for Tim Walz.
In Minnesota is expanding tonight. Mayors and state lawmakers are calling for stronger oversight and accountability from Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz. Meanwhile, congressional lawmakers are conducting their own oversight on this issue. Here's Chief Washington correspondent Mike Emanuel. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. The chairman of the powerful House Oversight Committee is demanding answers. James Comer says his committee is expanding its investigation into massive fraud and money laundering in Minnesota's social services programs. Comer's asking for records from the Treasury and Justice Departments, including suspicious activity reports and interviews with state officials. Comer says honest whistleblowers were ignored.
The state employees who were the first to blow the whistle on the fraud, they claim that they notified Governor Walz and Attorney General Ellison years ago. So this has been going on for years. The state employees have been blowing the whistle and alerting the governor, and he's turned a blind eye.
98 Minnesota mayors sent this letter to Walz and other state leaders expressing deep concern and growing frustration, calling on them to practice responsible fiscal management. 2 of the mayors spelled out their concerns earlier today on Fox.
Both the legislature and the governor are at fault for the fraud and the constant policies that are taxing Minnesotans.
It's stealing. You're stealing from the state of Minnesota. You're stealing from the taxpayers that make this state the great state that it is. And how are we going to recoup from that?
There are some suggestions the fraud could be as much as $9 billion, but Governor Walz says that is overblown.
I'll take accountability for it, but what you're seeing here is you're seeing a weaponization. We'll continue to fix it. They're going to continue to come up with numbers that don't have it there, and it's sensationalized. I don't expect anything different from this administration.
Administrator Kelly Loeffler says she notified Walz today that the Small Business Administration is stopping $5.5 million in annual funding to Minnesota pending further review. Adds with dozens of investigations underway, the unavoidable conclusion is Minnesota cannot be trusted to administer federal tax dollars. Brett?
Continue to follow it. Mike, thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Polito Realities. If you are new here, consider subscribing, liking and sharing today's video. Minnesota is suddenly in the spotlight. Headlines are very dramatic. We have seen the federal raids, fraud investigations, factories reportedly empty, and also political tension is rising. And some people are even saying Trump has finished Minnesota. But what is this really going on? Are these just routine investigations that are being exaggerated online, or is Minnesota becoming the center of a much larger political battle? When factories are mentioned as empty and leaders look pressured, it creates fear. And remember that fear spreads very fast. Before we jump into any conclusions, let's slow down and look at what this really means, politically, economically, and also nationally. Let's watch the reaction clips that I have with me and see exactly what is taking place in Minnesota. Stay tuned because we are going to have a real in-depth discussions at the end of this.
Let's talk about Minnesota and fraud, because now many on the right are calling for the arrest of Governor Tim Walz over this fraud scheme in Minnesota. But it doesn't actually pass the smell test. Now, to preface this, all fraud is bad, whether in Minnesota or anywhere else. Anyone committing fraud should be arrested, indicted, and prosecuted. And now there's a surge of federal officers heading to Minnesota to investigate fraud allegations. But this is nothing new. In fact, back in 2022, the Biden Department of Justice actually prosecuted a whole host of Minnesota residents for fraud. There was actually a $250 million scheme that was uncovered by the Biden Department of Justice, where the federal government accused 47 people of stealing cash meant to help feed needy kids in a COVID fraud scheme. Those people were indicted in 2022. At the same time, since January, Donald Trump has actually pardoned a whole host of folks convicted of fraud. And it wasn't just pardons. They don't have to pay back restitution. For example, Todd and Julie Chrisley, convicted of 12 counts of bank fraud. $17.8 million in restitution, they won't have to pay back. And that's why this all, to me, doesn't really pass the smell test. And it really just seems like a political hit job on Tim Walz more than anything else. And I'd be saying this if it was the other party doing this too, by the way. If you're going to care about fraud, you got to care about fraud across the board. What's happening in Minnesota, the investigations into potential fraud, it's not a new thing. It's not a Biden cover-up. It happened under Biden, actually. And it's not just happening in Minnesota. People have been indicted for fraud across the country. I remember working on cases like this in South Florida when I was an attorney. And if the Trump administration really cared about fraud, we wouldn't be pardoning those convicted of fraud. It's that simple. Spread the word, follow for more.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, this is the moment where the mask finally slips, because for years, Tim Walz, he said nothing, not a word, not a press conference, not a serious explanation. Meanwhile, warnings piled up while the numbers quietly exploded, while insiders were sounding alarms. Walz, or Waltz, depending upon how you like to pronounce his name, Tim Walz stayed silent and hoped that this would just go away. And then the numbers dropped. Not millions, not tens of millions, $1 billion. And this is when it happened, guys. That's when Tim Walz gave up. Suddenly he's tweeting. Suddenly he's talking responsibility. Suddenly the man who vanished for years, he wants you to believe that he's leading the charge. Tim Walz thinks you're stupid. I mean, is anybody else other than me offended by this? But here's the problem, guys. When you go from silence to scrambling overnight, that ain't leadership. That is panic. He's scared. He's running because the fallout isn't local anymore. This didn't stay in Minnesota. The Treasury stepped in, federal eyes locked on. And once that happens, the playbook changes real fast. And you could hear it in his words. I mean, let me know, y'all. I know you guys are hearing it. You could see it in his pivot, the excuses, the deflection. I mean, the same tired talking points rolled out at the exact same moment that they stopped working. And now national figures are weighing in. The scale is undeniable. The damage is real. And the question is if this explodes further. It's how far it goes and who gets caught standing in the blast radius. So tonight, I'm gonna break down exactly what is going on, how Walz folded, why the timing matters, what triggered federal involvement, and why this story just crossed a point of no return. Stay with me, guys, because once you see the sequence, you're gonna understand why this didn't happen by accident and why it's only getting bigger from here. Hit the like button. Thank you so much for subscribing to the channel. And for those who are already subscribed, make sure you're still subscribed. All right, let's go ahead and start with the moment that everything changed, because this is where the title comes from. For years, Tim Walz, he said absolutely nothing. Total radio silence, no urgency, no accountability, no curiosity, just avoidance. And that silence wasn't accidental. It was strategic. As long as the story stayed fragmented, as long as it stayed local, he could pretend it didn't exist. But then came the pivot. Out of nowhere, Tim Walz suddenly finds his voice. Tweets start flying, statements get released. He's deeply concerned. He's taken responsibility. And the speed of that shift tells you everything you need to know. This is not confidence. That is panic. When a politician goes from pretending something isn't happening to urgently trying to frame it overnight, that's the telltale sign. That's the moment when they realize that the story has escaped containment. Walz didn't step up. He folded. He gave up control of the narrative because the narrative was about to control him. Now, here's what really kind of makes the panic even more revealing. This wasn't new information. No, guys, this was not new. Don't let them
Details this morning of how people in Minnesota spend hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars on luxury cars and real estate. Now, this money was stolen apparently from programs that provided services to poor children. Many of the accused are Somali Americans, a fact that President Trump has used to criticize the broader community in general.
A honeymoon in the Maldives, a fleet of luxury cars. Here's a box with more than $270,000 in cash. This was all evidence from a new trove of files obtained exclusively by CBS News, showing how a group of...
Let's go to clip 116. Roll it.
I spoke in the fall about the iceberg I saw ahead. Something's fraud that's much larger than what's been visible to the public. When I said that, it wasn't hyperbole or rhetoric, it was a warning. So the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services pulled the claims data for these 14 programs dating back to 2018. And those 14 programs in Minnesota have cost $18 billion since 2018 and more than $3.5 billion in 2024 alone. Now, I'm sure everyone is wondering how much of this $18 billion was fraud. That's not the $1 million question, that's the $18 billion question. I don't make these generalizations in a hasty way, so when I say a significant amount, I'm talking in the order of half or more, but we'll see.
Even half is like $8 billion. But like, is my math? Maybe it's 9. It's actually 9. My math wasn't mathing. It's $9 billion is half of that. Let's go to what these fools were doing in 2015. This is way back in 2015. Roll the clip.
In order for the scheme to work, the daycare centers need to sign up low-income families that qualify for child care assistance funding. These surveillance videos are from a case prosecuted by Hennepin County. They show parents checking their kids into a center only to leave with them a few minutes later. Sometimes no children would show up. But either way, the center would bill the state for a full day of child care. This video from that same case shows a man handing out envelopes of what are believed to be kickback payments to parents who are in on the fraud.
Where was the money going? I don't know exactly where it went.
Can you imagine it? It's just crazy to me. People got to go to jail over this. I know we rant, we rave. People have to go to jail, prison. This is treasonous. If these people are stealing this money and sending it overseas to fund a terrorist organization, bruh, that's death penalty stuff. What are we even saying here? And I want to get to the part where we show y'all how not only have this been exposed by Nick Shirley, not only do we know how much money that has been potentially defrauded from one city, we have evidence of the gaslighting that they're doing. That's the crazy part, is the gaslighting. So before we get to the gaslighting, And before we get to whether or not people are going to go to jail, I want to talk about security real quick. Because if you have seen the craziness of what goes on when Nick goes out here, and as you can see in the clips that I played before, our people are protecting Nick in that clip. And the reason why you don't see them, because they're doing their job. Now,
but there was looting, there was vandalizing, there was obscene graffiti and spray paint written on federal cars. They tried to remove armed lockers full of weaponry from ICE vehicles, and the police, shame on you, Minnesota, Minneapolis police were ordered by Jacob Fried Brain Fry and Tampon Tim to stand down while this mook, this feckless, spineless, gutless, heartless, anti-American communist mook went live and said this last night.
Help us establish a record of exactly what's happening in our communities. You have an absolute right to peacefully film ICE agents as they conduct these activities. So carry your phone with you at all times. And if you see these ICE agents in your neighborhood, take out that phone and hit record. Help us create a database of the atrocities against Minnesotans, not just to establish a record for posterity, but to bank evidence for future prosecution.
Yeah, atrocities. Let's talk a little bit about those atrocities. These are the criminal scumbags that you see on your screen that the Democrats and Tampon Tim and Mayor Fried Brain Fray adore. They adore these guys and protect over the safety of you, me, hardworking American citizens that were arrested by our brave and dedicated ICE agents just yesterday in Minnesota. You have Keen Za Tan from Burma, who's convicted of vehicle theft, obstructing police, possession of burglary tools. He was also arrested for drug possession and driving under the influence. Seems like a stalwart of society. Juan Gonzalez Escamilla, removed from the U.S. 13 times and convicted of 2 counts of driving under the influence of liquor, obstructing police, fraud, impersonating. Juan Pablo Torres Keme from Ecuador, convicted of drug trafficking. Ying Li, convicted of prostitution. Fadili, I'm going to mess this up, Abukari Mashiri from Tanzania, convicted of larceny. Are these the atrocities that you're talking about, Tampon Tim? Actually had the audacity to post this after that ridiculous, atrocious live stream last night. I'm making a direct...
There is a lot that has been happening in Minnesota, and now Minnesota has suddenly become the center of national attention following the reports of fraud investigations and raids that have reportedly disrupted businesses and left some factories temporarily empty. The headlines are very dramatic, with some claiming the state is being finished politically. But beyond the sensational wording, the real issue is how quickly enforcement actions can turn into a larger political narrative. What may begin as investigations into fraud can rapidly evolve into a story about economic instability and also political pressure. At the heart of the conversation is the political tension between state leadership and national figures. Minnesota's Governor Tim Walz represents democratic leadership in a highly polarized national climate. Meanwhile, Donald Trump has built much of his political brand around law and order, strict enforcement, and also cracking down on fraud and immigration issues. Because of this contrast, many observers interpret these developments not just as legal actions but as part of a broader political struggle. The economic impact is another major layer. When factories are described as empty, even temporarily, that imagery creates anxiety. Workers begin to fear job losses. Businesses worry about long-term stability, and communities feel uncertain about the future. In today's media environment, phrases like raids and shutdowns spread very quickly, amplifying fear whether or not the situation is permanent. Economic perception can often be as powerful as economic reality. There is also the question of timing and national strategy. With political tensions already high across the country, actions taken in one state can send signals far beyond its borders. Some see the investigations as necessary accountability. Others question whether the intensity of the headlines reflects something more strategic. In a deeply divided political landscape, nearly every enforcement move is interpreted through partisan levels. Ultimately, Minnesota's situation highlights how law enforcement, politics, and public perception now overlap in powerful ways. What happened next will likely shape not only the state's economic outlook, but also the broader national conversations. Whether this moment strengthens one political side or fuels greater opposition remains to be seen, but it clearly shows how quickly a single state can become a focal point in America's ongoing political battle. Let me see what you think in the comment section. You have been watching Polito Realities.